Hey friends, in this video we are talking about how to have a meaningful conversation and share your faith with a Mormon. Let's jump in. Now, having a meaningful conversation with a Mormon isn't going to be that hard. Mormons are often known for being very friendly people. But sharing your faith, if you're like me, a Christian, that might be a little bit interesting because you'll find that Mormons use a lot of the same words, a lot of the same names, a lot of the same theological terms. But as you dive into the conversation, you might find that they mean something a little different. So in this video, I'm just going to be giving you some tips on how to have these meaningful conversations and how to have these great talking points that you can go through. So first things first, with Mormons, ask lots of questions and ask follow-up questions to the questions that you ask. Open conversation with an open mind and approach the conversation with the heart of a learner. When you approach other people with a sense of humility and actually wanting to learn about them, you'll find that it's a lot easier to have a fruitful conversation. When people realize that you're just trying to argue with them, you really just want to change their mind, that's going to make for more of an antagonistic type of a conversation rather than a friendly conversation. So first and foremost, as you engage Mormons, do it in a friendly way. Ask questions, and your goal out of the conversation should be to have a friendly and genuinely kind conversation with them, and for you to learn something and maybe for them to take something out of it as well. So approach the conversation with the heart of a learner. In the conversation, try to learn more about Mormonism and leave them something that they can learn about you and what you believe. So that's going to be the first tip. Approach the conversation with the heart of a learner. Second tip is this. Ask them to clarify their terms. When a Mormon says things like the Son of God, or says things like sin, or says things about the afterlife, ask them to clarify their terms. Because even as they might say things like, oh, sure, we also believe that Jesus died for our sins and rose from the dead, they might mean something very different by that, or what that entails for them. Or when they say things like salvation, they might mean something different by that. Or even when they say things like Christian or Mormon, they might have a very specific meaning behind that that's different from you and your understanding of that word or that term. So this tip is going to be, don't just take words and terms for granted. Don't just assume that you guys mean the same thing, because for many of these things, they're actually very different, but they use the same words. So whenever these important words come up for your own faith, ask them to clarify, what do you mean by that word? What do you mean by salvation? What do you mean by sin? What do you mean by Jesus is the Son of God? What do you mean by Mormon? What does it mean to be a Mormon? Lots of Mormons you'll find that actually claim to be Christians. They'll say that they're the only true Christians. So they'll say that even though they're Mormons, they're actually Christians. Then you might ask them like, so what's it mean to be a Christian? What's it mean to be a Mormon? If you're Mormon but you're Christian, does that mean that I as a Christian am a Mormon? And then they'll say, no, that's not what that means. Then you'll see that'll unpack a further conversation there. So that's going to be just an example of why clarifying terms and what they mean by them will really make for more fruitful conversation. You'll dive deeper into the subject of what things are truly similar and what are different. Because you'll find that Mormons might feel somewhat similar morally, that we have lots of moral similarities in our values, but they're actually very theologically different, as we'll talk about in a future video. So just because they're morally similar, don't assume that they're theologically similar, because there are some important differences. So first, approach the conversation with the heart of a learner. Second, ask them to clarify their terms. Third, avoid distracting subjects that really aren't central to the conversation. For example, when talking to a Mormon, you probably don't need to go to the subject of polygamy, men being able to marry multiple women. Even though that's something in Mormonism that might make for an interesting conversation, obviously that's a little different for me as a Christian. I don't believe in polygamy. I believe that God in the beginning created one man for one woman for a lifetime. But even though that's important, I'd say it is important. It's probably not central to the conversation about the differences between our worldviews, what we believe, and how we view Jesus. That's probably going to be more of a distraction than anything else. So avoid distracting conversations that aren't central. There are going to be lots of things that are distracting that you can talk about with really anyone of any worldview that's different from your own. But you should really try to focus on the things that are central to someone else's or your own worldview and how you can see what similarities and what differences you might have, rather than going to the more loosely connected conversations that might draw your attention. So, first, approach the conversation with the heart of a learner. Second, ask them to clarify their terms. And third, avoid distracting conversations. Other than that, the last thing I'm going to give you is leave them something to think about. One good question. I know someone who likes to say, put a pebble in their shoe. You know, when you get a pebble in your shoe and you keep walking, it's going to annoy you. It's going to stick with you. Eventually, you're going to have to stop and do something about it. So leave a Mormon with something like that, something for them to think about, something they found interesting, something that it was a question that they didn't know how to answer. You'll find that Mormons, it's hard to get them to hear the whole gospel in one conversation or really get to them at the point where they're actually considering your faith seriously just from that one conversation. And one reason for this is that Mormons are often surrounded completely by other Mormons within their churches, within their communities, within their family. So it's really going to be hard to get to ask them to leave all of that just in one conversation they had with you for the first time. So when talking to a Mormon, be willing to be their friend, even if they're not going to change from Mormonism, even if they're not going to convert. Can commit to kindness, in other words. Commit to kindness in that conversation. And yes, be intentional, but don't expect them to leave Mormonism just because of one conversation that you had. So rather than just trying to get to the foot of the cross in every conversation with a Mormon, I'd say be intentional, be strategic, and be kind more than anything else. Be kind in your character in the way that you treat them and you listen to them, and be strategic in the questions that you ask and the things you want to talk about. But don't expect them to convert in one conversation. Then if they haven't done that, then you failed. You just need to move on. No, commit to the relationship. Commit to kindness and continue to ask them good questions that might get them a little closer to the foot of the cross, might get them a little closer in things they're thinking and the way they're cross-examining their own views, things they start to question about what they believe, and things about what you believe that might get them thinking like, wow, that's actually really cool. I've never thought of it that way. So first, when talking to Mormons, in order to have an intentional and genuine conversation with them, in order to share your faith, ask lots of questions. Approach them with the heart of a learner. Second, ask them to clarify their terms. What do they mean by what they say, especially on the words and terms that you share? Because you're going to find that you actually mean something very different by those words and those terms and those names. So ask them to clarify their terms. Third, avoid distracting conversations that aren't central to either worldview. They're going to be more loosely connected. Focus on the central, more important conversations rather than going down those rabbit trails. And lastly, commit to kindness, commit to the relationship. Ask good questions, give them something to think about, a pebble that's stuck in their shoe. Don't expect them to convert in the first conversation. Commit to the relationship, continue the relationship, continue to show them kindness and listen, ask intentional conversations, and then leave the rest in God's hands. So guys, that's my tips for you on how to have an intentional conversation with a Mormon and share your faith. Hopefully those tips will help you just in having these conversations and asking those good questions, and Lord willing, he will use it to change lives for eternity. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.